This is Bluebook Digital SAT number 9, Reading and Writing, Module 2. Within baleen whale species, some individuals develop an accessory spleen, a seemingly functionless formation of splenetic tissue outside the normal spleen. Given the formation's greater prevalence among whales known to make deeper dives, some researchers hypothesize that its role isn't blank. Rather, the accessory spleen may actively support diving mechanisms. Is it replicable, predetermined, operative, or latent? So the semicolon means that the two parts of this long sentence actually relate or prove the same point. The fact that it may actively support something matches with it not being just vestigial, right? Not something like the human appendix where it no longer actually does anything. So they're saying that it's not just sitting there, which is not just latent. The province of X was situated on the Pacific coast, hundreds of kilometers southeast of T, the capital of the Aztec Empire. Because X's location within the empire was so blank, cacao and other trade goods produced there could reach the capital only after a long overland journey. Situated on the Pacific coast, hundreds of kilometers southeast, so it's far away from the capital and hard to get. It's therefore hard to basically transport the goods. Is that unobtrusive, concealed, approximate, or peripheral? The answer is peripheral, right? As in located on the edge, right? Peripheral vision is when you see something out of the corner of your eye, only as in from the edge. In 2016, GG and team announced that a chirping sound captured by laser interferometer gravitational wave observatory antennas was direct evidence of gravitational waves, which skeptics had argued would be too faint for detection. Detailed statistical analysis helped preclude claims of the events blank, confirming the signal at a confidence level of over 99%. Preclude, as in prevent claims of the events blank. So somehow the strong statistical proof showed that it wasn't not real, or it wasn't accidental. I'm just sort of guessing without looking at it. Yeah, help preclude claims of the event's inconspicuousness, discretion, ambiguity, or probability. The answer is ambiguity, as in something that could be interpreted more than one way, or something that's hazy or unclear. So the fact that they had direct evidence of it showed that the skeptics were wrong. The skeptics, as in the people who didn't believe it, thought it would be too faint for detection. But they showed it unambiguously. They showed statistical proof that got rid of claims of its haziness or lack of clarity. Political blogs with conspicuous ideological alignments became an integral component of U.S. media in the early 2000s. While some commentators lauded this development, asserting that such blogs had a welcome transparency missing from traditional views, less blank observers countered that such blogs tended to ideological extremes that exacerbated political polarization to problematic levels. So think about this in the real world. So political blogs with conspicuous ideological alignments, as in blogs that are obviously just Republican or just Democrat or just Libertarian, those became a big deal about 20 years ago. Some commentators lauded, as in praised it. So while some commentators praised it, less blank observers countered that it had drawbacks. So those in favor praised it, less. So you could have put the word positive or less approving. Is it sanguine, recalcitrant, misanthropic, or earnest? The answer is sanguine, which is from the Latin for blood, right? So warm-blooded or of good humor and positivity. Sanguine means that you agree or you're being positive or cooperative about something. It's not recalcitrant, which has to do with refusing to cooperate. It's not misanthropic, which has to do with hating human beings. And it's not about earnesty or honesty. So it's the people in favor lauded it, but those who were less in favor countered that it had drawbacks. Following text is from Charlotte F. G.'s 1888 poem At Newport. O deep delight to watch the gladsome waves exultant leap upon the rugged rocks, ever repulsed yet ever rushing on, filled with a life that will not know defeat. To see the glorious hues of sky and sea, The distant snowy sails glide spirit-like into an unknown world to feel the sweet enchantment of the sea thrill all the soul, clearing the clouded brain, making the heart leap joyous at its own bright singing waves. Sort of like an ode to the beauty of the sea and nature. Now, the function of the underlined, ever repulsed yet ever rushing on, filled with a life that will not know defeat. This is a personification of the waves. It's showing that the waves are ever rushing on and refusing to be defeated. It portrays the surroundings as an imposing and intimidating sea. No. It characterizes the sea's waves as a relentless and enduring force. I think so. Filled with a life that will not know defeat. Yeah, is enduring. And ever repulsed yet ever rushing on is relentless. I think that's the answer, but it conveys the speaker's ambivalence about the natural world. No. Ambivalence as in having mixed feelings? No. The speaker's definitely positive and taken by the beauty and impressiveness of nature. It draws a contrast between the sea's waves and no. Ecologists have long wondered how thousands of microscopic phytoplankton species can live together near ocean surfaces competing for the same resources. According to conventional wisdom, one species should emerge after outcompeting the rest. So why do so many species remain? Ecologists' many efforts to explain this phenomenon still haven't uncovered a satisfactory explanation. Ecologist MB and colleagues have connected phytoplankton's diversity to their microscopic size. Because these organisms are so tiny, they are spaced relatively far apart from each other in ocean water and, moreover, experience that water as a relatively dense substance. This in turn makes it hard for them to move around and interact with one another. Therefore, says B's team, direct competition among phytoplankton probably happens much less than previously thought. So this last sentence is definitely the important part of this passage. Direct competition among phytoplankton probably happens much less than previously thought. Based on the text, how would B and colleagues most likely respond to the conventional wisdom? Well, I think they would say that the conventional wisdom has been shown to be wrong by what they have investigated and figured out. But let's check. By arguing that it is based on a misconception about phytoplankton species competing with one another. Yeah, I think so, but by asserting that it fails to recognize the routine replenishment of ocean nutrients. It fails to recognize that routine replenishment of ocean nutrients prevents competition. No. By suggesting that their own findings help clarify how phytoplankton species are able to compete with larger organisms. No, their own findings show why, since they're actually spaced far apart and the water seems dense to them, that they don't compete at all. They effectively don't compete, which explains why they still exist in many different species, even though people would have assumed that they had to compete and one species had to win. So, by recommending that more ecologists focus the research on how no. For many years, the only existing fossil evidence of Mixopterid eurypterids, an extinct family of large aquatic arthropods known as sea scorpions and related to modern arachnids and horseshoe crabs, came from 4 species living on the paleocontinent of La Russia. In a discovery that expands our understanding of the geographical distribution of, I'm just going to say M, paleologists BW and others have identified fossilized remains of a new M species, TX, that lived over 400 million years ago on the paleocontinent of Gondwana. According to the text, why was Wang and his team's discovery of the TX fossil significant? Why was it significant? The fossil constitutes the first evidence found by scientists that M lived more than 400 million years ago. I don't think so. The only existing fossil evidence of MU came from 4 species living on the paleocontinent of La Russia. But then recently, BW and others identified fossilized remains on a different place. So it's not that it was the first that proved they were that old. It's that they were the first in a different location. Helps establish that M and are more closely related to modern... No. The fossil helps establish a more accurate timeline of the evolution of... No. The fossil constitutes the first evidence found by scientists that M existed outside the paleocontinent of La Russia, because it says the only fossil evidence for them came from the 4 species that were on La Russia, but then they found it on another continent. Poetry in classic Nahuatl, the language of the Aztec Empire, relies on difrasismo, or a parallel noun construction that conventionally operates as a single metaphor. For example, the common difrasismo in Cuautli in Oslo, I don't know why I'm trying to say this, in C in O, literally the eagle, the jaguar, signifies warrior. The device's function is both formal, providing structure to lines of verse, and ritual. Semantic relations among the two nouns and the concept they signify can be tenuous, as in the previous example, such that difrasismos are often only intelligible according to the conceptual associations observed in Aztec ceremonial culture. This is a complicated whole setup here. I'm going to say this again. The device's function is both formal and ritual, as the fact that it's ritual is explained by semantic relations among the two nouns and the concept they signify can be tenuous, as in the previous example, such that difrasismos are often only intelligible according to the conceptual associations observed in Aztec ceremonial culture. Ritual. So the word semantic has to do with the meanings of words. So they're saying the function of the device, the function of the difrasismo, is ritual, as in the people doing that culture's ceremony can understand the relationship. Okay? Which statement about the difrasismo, the eagle, the jaguar, is most strongly supported by the text? Its metaphorical significance derives from the semantic equivalence of the two nouns. No, definitely not semantically equivalent, because the words don't mean the same thing. They mean an eagle and a jaguar. So it operates as a single metaphor, but they don't mean the same thing. In fact, they're only intelligible. You can only make sense of it if you're steeped in that culture. Its unintelligibility may cause its formal function within a line of verse to go unnoticed by present-day readers. I'm not quite sure about that one. Present-day readers? I don't think it mentions people reading it today, so let's leave that. Its apparent obscurity can be resolved when considered in the proper cultural context. That seems to match what it says down here. Its apparent obscurity. So the relations between the two nouns are tenuous, as in shaky. The relationship between the nouns and the concept they signify are tenuous or shaky, so that the difference, they're only intelligible according to the culture, the conceptual associations observed in Aztec ceremonial culture. Yes, as in only in that culture can people understand the relationship between the double noun metaphor and a concept it signifies. So only in that culture do they get when you say eagle jaguar, you're talking about a warrior in the Aztec tradition. So its obscurity can be resolved when considered. I think it's that one, but this is a really tough question. Its frequency in classic Nahuatl poetry confirms its intelligibility to the Aztec audience. I don't think so, because it doesn't say that it's frequent. So it might be true that it's frequent, but that's not most strongly supported. So I think it's C. Ratio of manganese to calcium in samples from the Albaran Sea and Mauritanian coast. Approximate years before present. Approximate years before present in thousands. Manganese to calcium ratio. The population of the coral LP declined significantly around 9,000 years ago in the Albaran Sea and around 11,000 years ago near the M coast. Using the ratio of manganese to calcium, which inversely correlates with ocean oxygenation levels. Marine scientists R. de CPR and colleagues evaluated whether oxygenation played a role in the decline of LP. The researchers concluded that oxygenation may have been important in the Albaran Sea, but not near the Mauritanian coast, since... God, this is dense, right? So So LP declined 9,000 years ago in the Albaran. 9,000 years ago in the Albaran is about here where my cursor is, which is in this downward steeping part. But if you think about it carefully, approximate years before present. So 10,000 years ago is further in the past than 8,000 years before present. So this graph is actually backward logically. You're used to reading from left to right, going from beginning to end, but going from the distant past towards today, you actually have to go from right to left. So between 10,000 years ago and 8,000 years ago, the ratio is getting higher. And since the ratio inversely correlates with the oxygenation levels, the oxygen was getting lower. So the oxygen getting lower killed off the coral in the Albaran. That makes sense. Okay, now 11,000 years ago in the Mauritanian, so going from here to here, well, it's effectively flat. There doesn't seem to be much happening here. I don't think that's enough of a slope at all to say anything. So they concluded the oxygenation may have been important in the Albaran, but not in the Mauritanian coast. I would have said because this is sloping steeply upward, reading it from right to left, which causes the oxygenation to be going down. But this is not sloped at all, so it couldn't have been responsible. Okay, since a substantial increase in oxygenation in the Albaran Sea corresponded with the local decline in El Pertusa, but the opposite... No, it's not an increase in oxygenation. It's a decrease, because going from right to left, this goes up. So the ratio of the chemicals goes up, so the oxygen goes down, so no. El Pertusa declined in the Albaran Sea during the period of substantial local decline in oxygenation. Yes. But El Pertusa declined near the Mauritanian coast during a period of little... Yes, I think it's that one, but let's keep going. Oxygenation in the Albaran Sea was higher before the decline than after the decline. Was higher before... Well, maybe. Whereas oxygenation in the Mauritanian coast was relatively low both before and after. No, because the second part of C as in cat is wrong. Since these are both low, since it's always low for the Mauritanian, that means that the oxygenation is always high. So it's not the second part of C. Oxygenation in the Albaran Sea tended to be substantially higher than oxygenation near the Mauritanian coast. No, it's the opposite, right? Since these are higher always, then the oxygenation was always lower in the Albaran. So it's B as in boy. That's a really tricky graph, though. Psychologists DK and JH have argued that experiencing awe, a sensation of reverence and wonder typically brought about by perceiving something grand or powerful, can enable us to feel more connected to others and thereby inspire us to act more altruistically. K, along with Paul, P, and colleagues, claims to have found evidence for this effect in a recent study where participants were asked to either gaze up at exceptionally tall trees in a nearby grove, reportedly to be a universal awe-inspiring experience, or to stare at the exterior of a nearby nondescript building. After 1 minute, an experimenter deliberately spilled a box of pens nearby. So this is a setup with a control and a variation case to test whether people will act altruistically or kindly to take care of others, depending on whether they've experienced awe. So if you gaze at the beautiful trees, you're experiencing awe. And then if you just stare at a brick building, you're not experiencing awe. And then somebody spills something, and I'm guessing you're either going to jump in to help them pick it up or not. Which finding from the researcher's study of true would most strongly support this claim? Participants who had been looking at the trees helped the experimenter pick up significantly more pens than did participants who had been looking at the building. That seems to make sense, right? As in, if you'd been experiencing awe, you act more helpfully, more kindly, more altruistically. Participants who helped the examiner pick up the pens used a greater number of positive words to describe the trees in the building in a No, because it's whether you help based on whether you've experienced awe, so that divides it the wrong way. Participants who did not help the experimenter pick up the pens were significantly more likely to report having experienced a feeling of awe. No. Participants who had been looking at the building were significantly more likely to notice that the experimenter had dropped the pens than were participants who had... No, it's whether you help, right? Whether you pick up the pens, because that's the altruistic act. Power conversion efficiency of lowest and highest performing spin-coated and spray-coated electron transport layers. Lowest performing, highest performing. So the lowest and highest performing spray are the light grays, and the lowest and highest performing spins are the blacks. So the grays are always higher, right? The grays operate in a range from here to here, whereas the blacks operate in a range from here to here, okay? P solar cells convert light into electricity more efficiently than earlier kinds of solar cells, and manufacturing advances have recently made them commercially attractive. One limitation of the cells, however, has to do with their ETL, through which absorbed electrons must pass. Often the ETL is applied through a process called spin coating, but such ETLs are fairly inefficient at converting input power to output power. AT and colleagues tested a novel spray coating method for applying the ETL. A novel spray coating method. Okay, so the spray is the new thing, and the spin is the traditional. The team produced ETLs of various thicknesses and concluded that spray coating holds promise for improving the power conversion efficiency of ETLs in P solar cells. So they conclude that the spray coating is better, basically. Which choice best describes data from the graph that support T and colleagues' conclusion? Both the ETL applied through spin coating and the ETL applied through spray coating showed a power conversion efficiency greater than 10% at their lowest performing thickness. So the lowest being higher than 10 for both. Lowest is, that's true, but not the answer, because that doesn't compare the spray to the spin. The lowest performing ETL applied through spray coating had a higher power conversion efficiency than the highest performing ETL applied through spin coating. As in, this gray, so the lowest gray, which is about 15, is higher than the highest black, which is 13.5 or whatever. Yes, that's the answer, right? Because even the worst spray is better than the best spin. It seems that it should be that, but let's confirm. The highest performing ETL applied through spray coating showed a power conversion efficiency of approximately 13%. The highest in spray is 13. Well, that's wrong, right? It's more like 17, so no. While the highest performing ETL applied through spin showed a... No. There was a substantial difference in power conversion efficiency between the lowest and highest performing ETLs applied through spray coating. Well, yes, but that's not the answer, right? It has to compare the spray and the spin, so it's B. Political scientists who favor the traditional view of voter behavior claim that voting in an election does not change a voter's attitude toward the candidates in that election. Focusing on each U.S. presidential election from 1976 to 1996, EW and SM tested this claim by distinguishing between subjects who had just become old enough to vote, around half of whom actually voted, and otherwise similar subjects who were slightly too young to vote and thus none of whom voted. W and M compared the attitudes of the groups of subjects toward the winning candidates 2 years after the election. So the claim is that voting doesn't change your attitude toward the candidates. So basically, whether or not you vote doesn't actually change how you feel about the people running for office. Okay? And then they, to test that, had an experiment with a control. The control is the people who didn't vote at all. And they were testing the people who did vote. And they're testing them a couple years later to see how they feel about the candidates. Okay. Which finding, if true, would most directly weaken the claim made by people who favor the traditional view of voter behavior? So again, the traditional view is that voting does not change your attitude toward the candidates. Subjects' attitude toward the winning candidate 2 years after a given election were strongly predicted by subjects' general political orientation, regardless of whether subjects were old enough to vote at the time of the election. No, that's the trick wrong answer. That probably gets a lot of people, but it has nothing to do with political orientation. What they're trying to say is voting versus not voting, not changing how you feel. Subjects who were not old enough to vote in a given election held significantly more positive attitudes toward the winning candidate 2 years later than they held at the time of the election. I don't think it can be that one, because you have to compare the people who did vote and the people who did not vote and prove that their feelings changed somehow in different ways. Subjects who voted in a given election held significantly more polarized attitudes toward the winning candidates 2 years later than did subjects who were not old enough to vote in that election. Yeah, that's the answer. Because the fact that they were more polarized or more strongly went either positive or negative if they voted proves that it does matter whether you vote or not, which goes against the traditional view that voting does not change your view. That's really tricky. I'm just going to follow through with D's and dog. 2 years after a given election, subjects who voted and subjects who were not old enough to vote were significantly more likely to express negative attitudes than... No, C as in cat is the best answer. Again, very dense question, though. Among social animals that care for their young, such as chickens, macaque, monkeys, and humans, newborns appear to show an innate attraction to faces and face-like stimuli. Evie and her colleagues used an image of 3 black dots arranged in the shape of eyes and a nose or mouth to test whether this trait also occurs in testudo tortoises, which live alone and do not engage in parental care. They found that tortoise hatchlings showed a significant preference for the image, suggesting that even though tortoises live alone and don't get direct care from their parents, they still prefer to look at the smiley face with the eyes and the mouth, okay? Suggesting that face-like stimuli are likely perceived as harmless by newborns of social species that practice parental care, but as threatening by newborns of solitary species without parental care. Definitely not. Researchers should not assume that an innate attraction to face-like stimuli is necessarily an adaptation related to social interaction or parental care. Maybe, because even if they don't have social interaction or parental care, they still show the attraction to face-like stimuli. Researchers can assume that the attraction to face-like stimuli that is seen in social species that practice parental care is learned rather than innate. I don't think so. No, you can't assume that it's learned. Also, the hatchlings right away showed a significant preference, so I think it's not learned, so it's not that. Newly hatched T tortoises show a stronger preference for face-like stimuli than adult... No, it doesn't. You would have no grounds for judging that, so it's B. In a study of the cognitive abilities of white-faced capuchin monkeys, researchers neglected to control for the physical difficulty of the tasks they used to evaluate the monkeys. The cognitive abilities of monkeys given problems requiring little dexterity, such as gliding a panel to retrieve food, were judged by the same criteria as were those of monkeys given physically demanding problems, such as unscrewing a bottle and inserting a straw. The results of the study, therefore, well, without even looking at it, I would have said the results of the study are skewed, are misleading, or are at least somewhat invalid. Because if you're trying to test whether somebody is good with their hands and you just toss them a baseball, it's a lot easier than throwing something at them really quickly and seeing if they can catch it, I guess. So sliding a panel is much easier than unscrewing a bottle and inserting a straw, sure, especially for an animal. The results of the study, therefore, could suggest that there are differences in cognitive ability among the monkeys, even though such differences may not actually exist. Maybe, as in gives false conclusions because it was set up wrong. Are useful for identifying tasks that the monkeys lack the cognitive capacity to perform, but not for identifying tasks that the monkeys can perform. I don't think so, because you are able to see what they can perform. I don't think it's that. Should not be taken as indicative of the cognitive abilities of any monkey other than Well, you'd have no grounds for judgment about something beyond what's being studied right here. Reveal more about monkeys' cognitive abilities when solving artificial problems than when solving problems encountered in the wild. No, because that doesn't draw a distinction between... So it's that you set it up wrong, so you didn't consider how hard it was for them to physically do things. So if you conclude that they have certain abilities but don't have certain other cognitive abilities, you're failing to account for the difficulty of the physical maneuvering, which is A. In crafting her fantasy fiction, Nigerian-born British author H.O. has drawn inspiration from the classic 19th century fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm. Her 2014 novel Boy Snow Bird, for instance, is a complex retelling of the story of Snow White, while her 2019 novel Blank offers a delicious twist on the classic tale of Hansel and Gretel. While her 2019 novel Gingerbread offers, I don't think it's a long or logical pause. If you look back at the other part of this, her novel Boy Snow Bird, for instance, okay, while her 2019 novel Blank, definitely not D as in dog, because what comes before the colon is not able to stand on its own, so it can't be that. So it comes down to a question of whether you pause after Gingerbread. I'm going to say it both ways. Is a complex retelling of the story of Snow White, while her 2019 novel Gingerbread offers a delicious twist. I think it's just C as in cat. Let me say it without pausing. Is a complex retelling of the story of Snow White, while her 2019 novel Gingerbread offers a delicious twist. Yeah, while her 2019 novel Gingerbread offers a delicious twist, it's more logical to say that without pausing right there. When external forces are applied to common glass made from silicates, energy builds up around minuscule defects in the material, resulting in fractures. Recently, engineer EF of TU in Finland used the chemical blank to make a glassy solid that can withstand higher strain than silicate glass can before fracturing. Engineer EF of, I'm just going to reduce this to she. She used the chemical blank to make a glassy solid that can withstand higher strain than silicate glass can before fracturing. I'm going to say it with each option. Okay. She used the chemical compound, aluminum oxide, to make a glassy solid. No, definitely not that. She used the chemical compound, aluminum oxide, to make a glassy solid that can withstand... I don't think so, but let's leave that. She used the chemical compound, aluminum oxide, to make a glassy solid. So, is this required or could you remove it? So, if it has a comma before and after, that implies that it's able to be removed and wouldn't change anything. So let's say it without that, jumping over comma, aluminum oxide, comma. She used the chemical to make a glassy solid. Yeah, but you would have no idea what chemical you're talking about. That's why it's not C as in cat. I think it's just D as in dog. She used the chemical compound aluminum oxide to make a glassy solid. Yes. In 1943, in the midst of World War II, mathematics professor G.H. was recruited by the U.S. military to help the war effort by solving complex equations. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just blank. As a pioneering computer programmer, Hopper would help usher in the digital age. Well, let's show why the wrong ones are wrong. B as in boy is wrong because it would be a comma splice mistake after though. You could have said, Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations, though. As a pioneer, so if this was a period after though, and then a capital A in as, it would make sense, but you definitely cannot do what's in B as in boy. D as in dog makes no sense, just to blur it together. Now, A and C are actually both grammatically valid, but C doesn't make sense. A is the right answer. Let's talk about why it's not C. I'm going to say this whole part with C. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations. Though, as a pioneering computer programmer, Hopper would help usher in the digital age. That makes it seem like the fact that she would usher in the digital age goes against it involving more than just equations, but those actually go together. So A is a better answer. Let me say it with A. Hopper's subsequent career would involve more than just equations, though. As a pioneering computer programmer, Hopper would help usher in the digital age. Sure. And this explains or follows through on the fact that it involved more than just equations. Increased gender diversity is revitalizing the field of economics, according to Harvard's CG. The trailblazing accomplishments of G, winner of the 2023 Nobel Prize in Economics for her work on women in the labor force, blank to the value of scholars of diverse backgrounds and spurring research into previously unexplored but vitally important topics. This is all about eliminating the prepositional phrase in order to match the subject and the verb. So everything from of all the way through here is a prepositional phrase that can effectively just be ignored. The trailblazing accomplishments blank to the value of. So the subject is accomplishments, which means you have to have a plural verb, which just has to be this. The accomplishments attest to the value of. Recent pollen analyses of the Aran Islands have led some researchers to propose that the now treeless islands were once wooded. This hypothesis blank that certain trees, such as P. sylvestris, survive without interruption or human intervention through the Holocene cannot stand, researchers M and K counter, unless other explanations can first be ruled out. These are getting very difficult. Okay. This hypothesis that certain trees such as whatever survived through the Holocene cannot stand, these people say, unless other. This hypothesis. Okay, so it actually can't be the ones that you're imagining it's going to be. You think it's going to be C as in cat, but it's actually not that. Because if you read it with C, this hypothesis suggests that certain trees, such as P. sylvestris, survive without interruption or human intervention throughout the Holocene. You're expecting a period, but it's not. This hypothesis suggests whatever cannot stand. No, it's actually A, as bizarre as that seems at first. Okay. This hypothesis suggesting that certain trees, such as P. sylvestris, survive without interruption or human intervention throughout the Holocene cannot stand, researchers M and K counter, unless. That's a really, really hard example of why you always have to read all the way through to the end of the sentence. You have to read all the way down to here to have a chance at parsing what's happening in this one. Again, that's just really tricky, though. Atoms in a synchrotron, a type of circular particle accelerator, travel faster and faster until they blank a desired energy level, at which point they are diverted to collide with a target, smashing the atoms. They travel faster and faster until they reach a desired energy level. Compared to that of alumina glass, blank silica glass atoms are so far apart. Compared to that of alumina glass, silica glass, no. Silica glass, no. A significant advantage of, no. Silica glass's atomic arrangement has to be this one, right? Compared to that of, right? Compared to the atomic arrangement of one type of thing, the other thing's atomic arrangement is more dispersed. That's the items in a comparison. With his room-sized installation, Unicorn My Private Sky, Norwegian artist B.S. succeeds in creating a whimsical yet perplexing experience. A whimsical yet perplexing experience. Blank. When visitors set foot inside the fantastically blue room and encounter the life-size stuffed unicorn preening at the far end of it, they are both dazzled and confused, as if stepping into a strange and enchanting new world. A whimsical yet perplexing, as in fantastical and fanciful, but still somewhat confusing and bizarre experience. Blank. Second. I don't think it's second. Instead, no, because it doesn't go against it. Indeed, maybe. Nevertheless, no. It's indeed, yeah, as in, as further shown by, or like as proven by, or here we're going to give you much more examples of it. Notice that dazzled and confused matches with perplexing and enchanting perhaps matches with whimsical, so it just further proves it. Economist E.O.'s studies of communities around the world have empirically demonstrated that common pool resources such as grazing lands can be sustainably managed by the people who use them, rather than through private entities or centralized governments. Blank. O's work is a repudiation of the tragedy of the commons, the view that individuals will inevitably overexploit a finite shared resource if given unfettered access to it. So the tragedy of the commons basically implies that if you let people manage their own things, they'll destroy it. But this person's studies show that if you let people manage it as a community, it's actually sustainable. Okay. So I would have said something like, therefore, it's a repudiation of, right? As in, therefore, it's a rejection of. No, not by contrast. Not for example. And it's not that's it. No, it's as such. Yeah, as such, as in, therefore, or thus, or in doing so, it repudiates. Wants to emphasize a similarity between the two books by St. St's book Tales from Outer Suburbia, which describes surreal events occurring in otherwise ordinary places, contains fewer short stories. No. Tales from Outer Suburbia was published in 2008, and Tales from Inner Cities was no. Unlike Tales from... No. It has to be the last one, right? A similarity. St's books Tales from Outer Suburbia and Tales from the Inner City both describe surreal events occurring... Yes. Wants to present the Q study and its conclusions. Present the study and its conclusions. So, without even looking at it, here's what they set up to study and here's what they figured out. As part of a 2013 study of cat domestication, a chemical analysis was conducted on cat bone fragments found in Q, China. No, because that doesn't say the conclusion. A 2013 analysis of cat bone fragments found in Q, China suggests that cats there may have been domesticated. I think so. In 2013, archaeologists studied what cats in Q, China had eaten more. No, because that doesn't say the conclusion. Cat bone fragments estimated to be 5,300 years old were found in Q. Well, no, because that doesn't say the study. So it seems like B. The conclusion is that cats may have been domesticated 5,300 years ago. Chemical analysis revealed the cats consumed. The grain consumption is evidence that cats may have been domesticated. Yes. Wants to introduce the artist's 1983 poetry collection. Before she published the books Precario Precarious 1983 and Instan, CV exhibited visual art at the Museo Nacional, but that doesn't specifically introduce the 1983 poetry collection, so no. CV is a true multidisciplinary artist whose work include numerous... Well, it can't be that because that doesn't mention the 1983 poetry collection. Published in 1983 by TP, Tandem Press, PP is a collection of poetry by the... Seems like it. In 1971, CV exhibited her first solo album, Pinturas... Well, no, it's just this one, right? Introduce the 1983 poetry collection, which is the thing with that name. Wants to emphasize the aim of the research study. Emphasize the aim, as in, this was their goal in doing the whole thing. Researchers wanted to know which factors influence lizard egg clutch size because such factors have been well studied in birds but not in lizards. That actually sounds good. That's the aim. After they obtained data for over 3,900 lizard species, researchers determined that larger clutch size was associated with environments in high... No, because that's not the aim. That's the outcome. We now know that lizards in higher latitude environments may lay larger clutches to take advantage of shorter windows of favorable conditions. Again, that's not the aim of the study. Researchers obtained clutch size and habitat data for over 3,900 lizard species and analyzed the data with statistical methods. No, because then that's the process of how they studied it, but not the aim. So it's just A.